Good evening, everyone. I hope you're all doing well this Tuesday night, or if you're joining, like my guest from down in New Zealand, this Wednesday morning. Um, this is the last of our softer side sessions, certainly the last in this format. We've been hosting these sessions for I think it's well over 5 months now. So covered a lot, got to speak to a lot of fascinating people and have some great conversations around whiskey. We started these sessions very much as a way of keeping in touch with everyone and keeping the conversation going around whiskey. And although things are slow to go back to what we would call normal, our visitor centres open a few days a week. We're taking tours. I'm seeing more and more tastings going on. So we are still having that conversation. As always, if you ever need to get in touch with us or ask any questions, you can contact us on all of our social media channels. So this will be the last live one of these sessions, but it's not going to be the end of what we're doing here. I think everyone in the world has realized that there is so much more to be done with technology, and certainly what we've realized is that there's so much that we can do through these media outlets um, to continue the conversation around our product, around our whiskey. So you might see me popping up every so often to do a live tasting of a new release and answer any questions that you've got on any new releases. I'm looking forward to those coming up. What we're also going to be doing is trying to do more pre-recorded content. All these sessions have been live, and I've enjoyed engaging with the chat and seeing you all have the chat back and forth. But now we're able to go back into out into the world and have these conversations in person. So a good example was one of the sessions that we had lined up was exploring the link between whiskey and golf. And we could absolutely have that conversation on this format, but we could have it in a much better way at a golf course, having a few drams. So we're going to bring things like that to you as well. And hopefully, as we go back towards normality and I get to travel again, I'll be able to record some content when I'm out on the road speaking to bartenders, whiskey personalities in various markets, and hopefully seeing some of you at tastings and events in the months and years to come. What I'd like to do before we start with tonight's show, though, is just say a massive, massive thank you to everyone that's been involved in these sessions over the last 5 months, whether you've been a guest, whether you've been a viewer, or whether you've just been someone that's sent a little message in or enjoyed the chat. I cannot thank you enough for the conversations that we've had over the last 5 months. I think I would have been going a little bit doolally at the moment. There's a Scottish word for you, doolally. If I wasn't able to continue to speak to people about whiskey, it's meant that I've had an outlet to have conversations with people in the whiskey industry. So personally from me, and also from everyone that works at Tomatin, thank you so much for your involvement in these sessions. And I hope you've enjoyed them. I hope you've learned a little bit about Tomatin. I hope you've learned a little bit about what makes the whiskey industry tick. The way we wanted to do these sessions was not to be a weekly or bi-weekly Tomatin advert. It was to add a little bit more to the whiskey conversation and tell you a little bit about, introduce you to some of the people that make the industry work, that maybe aren't always on the front line. And I hope you've enjoyed that. And to round off these sessions, we're going to be talking about something that is very close to my heart, and it's something that I've missed doing this year, and it's very close to my guest's heart tonight as well, and that is the subject of whiskey tastings. We've all been to them, we've all enjoyed them. We're going to share some of our experiences of holding these tastings, and towards the end of the video, we'll also give you a couple of tips on how we feel the best way to hold maybe your own small tasting. I think more and more people are looking to do things like this at home, and hopefully we can give you a couple of tips that just give you the confidence to invite some of your pals around, or even if it's virtually, to hold a whiskey tasting. It's not impossible. It's not as daunting as it may seem. So with that said, my guest tonight is Sam Snead, American born, living in New Zealand, and we're going to find out about his journey to. Sam is also working on the breaking the world record for the world's largest whiskey tasting. So I'm looking forward to finding out about that ambitious project that he's got going on. So we're going to be talking all about how to hold a tasting in your living room, right up to holding a tasting in a rugby stadium halfway around the world. So as always, let us know what you're drinking. Let us know if you've got any questions. I'll always try and monitor the chat and ask the guests any questions that we've got. Other than that, buckle in and grab a dram for the last of our live softer side sessions. Sam, I would say good evening, but I guess it's good morning with you. How are you?
I'm good, mate. I'm good. Yeah, it's good morning over here. It's a little after 8 o'clock our time, but a little after 9, I guess, for you guys.
Yeah, a little after 9 over here, and I'm going to assume that with it being 8 in the morning, that you will not be joining me for a dram right now. But
I did notice that. I did see you had a dram there. I'm sitting there thinking, wow, should I? Your taste buds, they say you taste better in the morning anyway. They're they're spot on. So I'm thinking maybe I should grab a dram, but now it's too late. I'm good. I'll have my
yeah,
coffee in a minute.
quite right, quite right. I think one thing we've got to be very cautious of on these sessions is promoting responsible drinking. But you're absolutely right. I know from my own experience, if I'm ever doing nosing and tasting or pulling a blend together, I always try and do it first thing in the morning, just because the day's not worn you out a little bit yet. So yeah, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, the
How are
taste
things
buds
in
are
New
fresh.
Zealand?
Oh, sorry.
I was just asking how things are in New Zealand.
We got thrown into lockdown again. Well, Auckland got thrown into lockdown again a couple of weeks ago, and we're still in the middle of that. So obviously, Auckland being the biggest city in this country, it affects businesses everywhere. We're not in lockdown here where I am up in Mungawhai, which is about an hour and a half north of Auckland. But still, when people can't get out of Auckland or get into Auckland, it throws a spanner into the works. So yeah, that's what we're dealing with right now. And supposedly we have another week of it. We'll just have to see.
Yeah, yeah.
It's not ideal.
No, I know exactly how you feel. We are coming out the other end of our lockdown, but my sister, she lives in Aberdeen, and they were put back into a lockdown. I think everyone's probably agreed that these regional lockdowns are better than full nationwide ones that we've been having for the last few months, but they still make everything difficult. And Aberdeen's a very different situation from Auckland. It's not the beating heart of Scotland, even though I'm sure some of the football fans would like to tell you that it is.
I was gonna say, yeah, surely, surely.
Yeah.
What about down south? You guys are more affected up north right now. Is that right? Edinburgh and Glasgow, not so much right now, or?
So I've to be honest, I've got a little bit fatigued with a lot of this, and I've not really kept up with the numbers or anything because I
Yeah,
think
same.
I think you can it's almost death by spreadsheet when you just are looking at numbers over and over again. So I honestly couldn't tell you what the case is in the Highlands right now, but certainly my experience is that as things have opened back up in the UK, so many people are traveling to the Highlands, and it's totally understandable. It's a beautiful part of the world. People aren't able to get on their holidays like they used to, and we absolutely welcome it. It's a big boom to the economy and to business. But all we can say is that we just hope that everyone obeys by the guidelines and is still sensible because the infrastructure just isn't here to really support any big outbreak that could happen. So if you are visiting the Highlands, you're more than welcome, and please come to our distillery if you can book a tour, but please follow the guidelines as well, is all I'm going to say to people.
Yes, that's the problem. It's just like in our situation here in New Zealand, it just takes one individual and then it gets to the family and then it gets to the school and it spreads like wildfire and it happens that
Really,
quick. And it's amazing. It just takes one. Like you say, just please follow the guidelines.
yeah. Now, getting straight into whiskey, I've seen a question from David Owen, and he's asking, "Evening, Scott. What is your personal but honest opinion of Tomatin's 15-year-old American Oak? Just bought a bottle." David, I would like to know if that is the old packaging with the black top and the red bottom, or if it's the purple packaging that's part of our travel retail range now. Either way, it's a wonderful whiskey, but I just want to put it into the timeline. So when I started back at Tomatin in 2012, and you'll maybe remember this as well, Sam, the core range of Tomatin back then was simply Tomatin 12, 15, and 18-year-old. And the 12 and 18 were sherry matured, whereas the 15-year-old was this American oak matured. And what
Which was
happened
a
was,
very good dram, by the way.
yeah, yeah. What happened with it was as the brand developed, we took it out of the core range and released our 14-year-old Portwood. And then, and Lance is in the chat saying it's great as well. Lance works for our partner over in Phillips, our partner Phillips over in the States, in Texas. And when we released our travel retail range, we reintroduced the 15-year-old. And for me, I would say it was one of those whiskies. I started working at Tomatin just at the same time as I started drinking whiskey. And it was one of those aha moments for me, just the how um, how impactful subtlety could be. It's not an over. It's not going to leap out the glass like I'm drinking the 18-year-old tonight, which is a heavily sherry matured whiskey. It's all about that vanillas and the sweetness and the fruit. One thing I would suggest to you, David, is try that with spicy food. Once you've had a dram, yeah, the purple package, the travel retail one, brilliant. Once you've had a dram and you've enjoyed it, try it with some spicy food, with like some Thai food or some Chinese food. The vanillas and the coconuts in the whiskey really offset those flavors, and it's a wonderful experience.
It's funny. He's asked that question because I know that dram quite well. But that little 15, if he wants to try something a bit strange, I mean, I've done so many tastings that we've paired foods and cheeses. You just do these strange things sometimes when you're just experimenting. Have him try blue cheese with a bit of honeycomb on with the blue cheese on a little biscuit or cracker, or however you want to say it. And the saltiness of that little blue cheese and the creamy sweetness of the honeycomb, it just pops with that little dram. If it's the original 15, the 100% American matured one, that one, it's fascinating. It's really, really a good pairing, and I'll never forget that one.
So just from what he's saying there, it's not the original one, but from my experience, the way this whiskey's matured is the exact same. It's the same product in a new package, but it's for travel retail. So obviously there's going to be slight variations. When it gets to 15 years old, it's not quite as consistent as a 12-year-old or a legacy, but same sort of area. But let's, you mentioned there, whiskey tastings and a little bit of your experience, but let's go back to the beginning. How did you first get into whiskey? And then I guess, how did that take you to New Zealand? That's a long story, I'm sure, but I want to get into it.
Oh, well, when you're a barman, and I was a young barman in the early 90s there in Montana. And when you're behind the bar, all bartenders, if you're behind the bar long enough, you kind of choose a path, so to speak. Whether it's some bartenders get into wine, some bartenders get into tequila, rum, craft beers, like this. And it just happened for me, Scotch became a thing. And I was at a bar in New York visiting a mate of mine who just opened a bar there in the city. And I was sitting at a bar and I'm drinking Glenfiddich on the rocks. And this is ages ago. You got to understand. So Glenfiddich was the big thing in the States. It was single malt was the thing. And I was watching. I'm a strange American. I'm a big footy fan. I'm a massive Liverpool fan. So we were actually watching Liverpool and Arsenal on the big screen there. And so after the match, this little old Scottish gentleman sitting next to me, he taps me on the arm, not to be rude. He was not being rude. And he said, "Son, I can tell you're enjoying your Scotch." He goes, "But you're doing it all wrong." And I'm like, "Excuse me?" I'm sitting there thinking I'm this cocky little kid from Montana, bar owner, yada, yada. And so, but like I say, he wasn't being rude. He said, "Have your friend bring me over a couple of wine glasses." This was before we had all these fancy glasses that we have today. And so Travis brought a couple of wine glasses over, and he said, "Now ask him to grab us the Dalwhinnie and the Lagavulin." And so he grabbed those two whiskeys. And of course, by now the bar had cleared out. And so we pour a couple of drams, and he explains. He said, "Now, all right, take that first Dalwhinnie." And he said, "Now smell it." And of course, me, there's no ice or anything. It's the first time I'd done this neat. And so he says, "Now smell it." So I give it a quick smell, and I'm getting ready to hit it back. And he goes, "No, son." He said, "Smell the whiskey." He said, "Smell it and tell me what you smell." So I'm like, ah. And I'll never forget it. Dalwhinnie will always be one of my favorite whiskeys because of this. Lagavulin as well, but Dalwhinnie. And so you smell it, and when he asks you what you're smelling, you actually begin to think. And that's what I do a lot of times at tastings. I'll really get people to actually smell it. Get your nose in there and really smell it. It goes through your olfactories and then it hits the back of your throat, and you actually begin to taste it. What you're smelling, you can taste. And so I smelled it, and he said, now take a sip, let it sit in your palate for a few seconds. And then he said, let it slide down the back of your throat. I'm like, all right. And so I did, gave it a good smell and just let it sit on my palate for a minute. And all those flavors, from smelling it, they just burst. You can get the vanillas, the honeycomb, a little bit of that back end smoke that you'll pick up off Dalwhinnie. And it was just amazing. And apparently he saw my face and he said, now you know how to drink whiskey. And I was just blown away. So then we go into Lagavulin, and he begins to explain to me the whole bit that, look, everything back there, all those single malts back on that back bar, they're all made the same, exactly the same 3 ingredients, the whole bit. He said, just with this big boy, we've added peat. And so he explains a little bit of peat to me, the whole bit. And then I tried the Lagavulin, and I saw the vast difference. And from that 15-minute conversation with that lad, he has no idea how he affected my life. Just that 15-minute conversation of explaining to me that Glenfiddich on the rocks, not, Glenfiddich's a phenomenal whiskey, but just on the rocks. And he's just like, and in the tumbler, just not right. And so he set me straight and showed me the proper way to do it. And I've kind of taught from that 15 minutes with him. I've structured my whiskey teachings or education, or however you want to say it, from that conversation. But it just blew me away how a spirit could be so different, but yet it's made exactly the same, minus the peat, of course.
Yeah.
And so that stayed with me my whole life. And it, when I went back to Montana and everything, and every bar, everywhere I've traveled around the world, that little conversation has stuck with me. And because of that, it gave me the desire, all right, I need to start going to some of these distilleries and learning more, and so then I started doing some of the American distilleries and then getting over to Scotland. And I remember explaining to my mom that I was going to go to Scotland and do some of these distillery tours. And she's just like, son, she said, they're going to just eat you up. You're just a little kid from Montana, and they're not going to give you the time of day. But it was the exact opposite. I'm still friends with a lot of the people over there from those earlier, tours, from Mortlock to Glengoyne to you guys. And it was just an amazing experience to go over there. And as you guys do in Scotland, you're just appreciative of the fact that your spirit is out there. And so if some kids come over from America in some obscure place to see what you make and how you make it, then you're going to spend time with them and teach them and show them, and to make sure that information's spread out properly, and to get that passion. And it just it really changed my life. And so I got into tastings by wanting to get that information out there. People would come up behind the bar and they would say, you're the guy that knows about single malts. And it just became a thing. So that's how it kind of started.
That's incredible. I love hearing stories about people visiting distilleries back. We're looking at, I guess, the better part of 20 years ago now, and I think.
Well, it was before the visitor centers, it really was. I'd just rock up and they would, I'd just say, look, I'm this kid from Montana in this bar. And they're like, oh, yeah, well, come check this out. And it was an open arm kind of thing. I think Glenfarclas might have been the only one that was really pushing the visitor center. Glenfiddich and Glenlivet had them, but not quite like Glenfarclas.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, I think back at that point, I think we had a visitor center, but I've got no knowledge on what it was. But back at that point, you probably came to the distillery.
You guys did. I went. It was quite. It was more like an office room. It was just like much bigger than my little space here. You came in, there was a little desk there, and you'd kind of introduce and tell who you were, and then off you went with someone if there was anyone around.
Now, when you were there, did Tomatin still have the 23 stills at that point in time when you went into the still house?
No, they did not. They had just torn those down, and they were cutting. I remember they were trying to cut the ferment, the wash bags out.
Yeah.
And it was it looked like a disaster, like a bomb had exploded in there. It was probably before you were ever there.
We have still not managed to get rid of those. If you go into the old tun rooms, so these are incredible big pieces of kind of Victorian engineering. The big wrought iron for washbacks, and
They were like
you,
this thick. They were just that huge because some of them were
yeah.
just like half cut out. I've still got some photos probably.
Yeah, so when you can still go, we don't do it as part of the tour because it just is not up to code. But when you pop your head into the old ton room, um, there's 12 tons, but one of them has been like kind of cut in half, and I think they
It's
got,
still there.
oh yeah, they got like half of one of them out, and then said, yeah, no, we're not doing that
Yes,
again.
all
I think
that.
I think what happened was that the cost to cut them and get them out was actually going to be more than the cost of the scrap metal that we would get back. It was that intensive. So
Yeah,
yeah,
a bit
I
cost
think
prohibitive.
we're actually glad to have them now because they form part of a strategy for retaining hot water that we're going to be trying to implement in the years to come to kind of reduce water usage. So it's probably a good thing that we kept a hold of them. But for 20 years, they've lain there with absolutely no plan in place. Um, but no, incredible to hear that story of going to Scotland back at that point because you touch on something that's very unique there. I'm very lucky to be able to travel the world and see where Tomatin is, how big its reach is. But I think for the vast majority of people in the company, when people come over from Montana, New Zealand, Asia, and they say, "Oh, I'm a fan of Tomatin," just this idea that Tomatin is out in the world, the thing that you produce every day, it's great to see it. And I was back in 2013, I was doing a couple of shifts in the still house, and I was working with our stillman at the time, Stevie Rogers, and he told me that the previous evening he was on night shift, and at 3 o'clock in the morning, this guy showed up at the still house. 3 a.m., pitch black, and this guy walks in. I think he was from Singapore, and his name was something along the lines of it was either lion or tiger or something like that. And the guy just comes straight into the still house, walks up to Stevie and goes, "Hey," and I'm just going to say his name was Tiger for the purpose of this story, but he was, "Hey, my name's Tiger. I'm a bartender in Singapore and I love Tomatin. I checked out of my hotel early by accident and my flight's not till the morning. Can you give me a tour?" and, and Stevie's just like, "Yeah, I mean, sure, why
Sure,
not?"
why not?
So
Nothing better to do at 3 a.m.
yeah, I would love to one day meet this guy and just find out if he realizes how weird that situation was. But yeah,
Well, it's
fantastic.
not as weird as you think, actually, Scott, because I've done that same scenario twice myself. I rocked up at Ardbeg. I was staying at Ardbeg House, and my mate and I were having a bit of an excursion, and we went to the still house at about 2:30. I think we've got a photo of the clock. It's like 2:35 in the morning. And then the same thing at Tobermory over there. So yeah, just having a bit of a look around, and I think it's a big part of the Scotch industry itself. It's still old school, and people just feel comfortable, going around like in the olden times. It's kind of stuck. It's never moved on, so to speak. And I guess people just feel comfortable, like myself. I can only speak for myself, but by the sounds of it, this guy was a bit of the same. It's like, it'll be cool just to rock up at 3 a.m. and say hello. Why
Yeah.
not?
Well, what's the worst that can happen, right? You can be told no and you have to go away. Okay, you've tried. But what you'll find, I would say, I'm not going to say this right now because what we'll have is everyone that's ever going to watch this video showing up at Tomatin at 3 in the morning looking for a tour. But I dare say that most guys that work in production would actually give you a little bit of time. They would have a conversation with you. But so you get into whiskey. How did that lead to you sitting in an armchair in what looks like a wonderful store in New Zealand?
Well, my wife, was in Spain, and so I ended up marrying her and moving to Spain. We were living in Madrid, and we're there for years. It was fast and furious. Spain was one of the earlier countries that really hit it. They were hit really hard, And so Karina came home from work. She was working for Oracle. She's in IT, and she came home and she said, "Look, I don't know how much longer we'll be able to make it here." And I was teaching some English, and I was working also for one of Spain's largest whiskey importers there as well, Marcial. And so we started to think, all right, do we want to go back to the States? And I really didn't want to go back to the States. So we just started looking around. And funnily enough, we put our original paperwork in for Australia. And this was 2009. And because we'd both been to Australia, knew a bit about Australia. So it's like, oh, we'll go to Australia. Well, the thing is when you're studying Australia, all the time on the sidebars, as you're getting all this information, the sidebars are all information about New Zealand. So both of us, unbeknownst to ourselves at this time, would start and read all this information about New Zealand. And one day she came home from work, and I said, "You know what? What would you think about?" And I mean, we'd already put in our expression of interest the whole bit for Australia. The paperwork was already started. And I said, "What would you think about us maybe going to New Zealand? And if it doesn't work out in New Zealand, we can just go on over to Australia." And she said, "Funny you say that, but I've been doing the same thing." She'd been studying, looking at New Zealand as well. And New Zealand is, especially the South Island, it's a bit like Montana anyway. It's if you were to cut Montana up and dump it in the South Pacific, you'd basically have the same thing: mountains, rivers, lakes, minus the coastline. We obviously don't have coast, but a lot of this, not much population, a lot of similarities. And I thought, well, yeah, why not? We didn't know a soul here, not a person, not a job prospect, just nothing. We loaded up the container and sent it here and did our interview process, which was painstaking. But and we had arrived in New Zealand January 21st, 2010, and have been here ever since. And I opened up the House of Whiskey not a year later. Well, about a year later, I think September of 11, I opened the House of Whiskey, and we've been here ever since. And now I've got the place with Evan, up north here in Mungafai, the Village Wine and Spirits. We do a little bit more of everything. This side of the shop is more of our spirits section. The other side is more of like our wines and such. We've got craft beers. New Zealand's become a bit of an educated audience, so it's quite nice that we're able to survive off having quite a specialty shop. And when I say survive, we're barely hanging on like everybody else right now, as you can imagine, but we're holding our own.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
that's
I
how I
think
got here.
that's
That's how we
that's
wound up in New Zealand.
it's an incredible story, a great story. I think, like you say, they're hanging on is a word that I'm sure a lot of people who are watching this and working in alcohol stores around the world will fully appreciate right now. It's not easy times, so all I can suggest to people that are watching this is support your local booze shop. They've been there for you before this. They've had to shut down for a couple of months, but if they're open, please support them. They do a fantastic job. Um, Not just for educating consumers and spending time talking to them. I think that's something that you don't get in any other form of retail. I think I'm a big fan of online retail, especially for whiskey, because it means that so much is so available. But there's nothing quite like having a conversation with a professional about a product in a store and then really bringing a passion to a product like that. So yeah, I'm hoping that everything comes through okay for you guys and the store will continue to thrive.
Well, we hope so. The supporting local, the thing, it's interesting. What's happened for us is when you walk in the door on the other side there, that's where the wines and the craft beers and everything are over there. And few people would kind of make their way over to this part of the shop. And for me, this is obviously the most important part of the shop. But what happened was when we got thrown in that first lockdown, we went to like level 4 and no one could go anywhere. Like literally, you couldn't leave your home for a couple, 3 or 4 weeks. And so people got online, and I don't want this to mean bad or come out as rude or anything, but like the older generation, like my mom, for example, she hates IT. She won't order anything online. But when everybody got thrown into lockdown, it taught people, you had to teach yourself to go online and look for clothes, look for this and that. And so we started getting like 100 times more hits on our website. So people would go in and, you're just bored. So you just start flicking through. Oh, they've got whiskeys, they've got gins and rums. And they just started going through. So when we came out of lockdown, my single malt sales quadrupled because people knew we had the product. So it changed our clientele. It changed what the buying, and the percentages of what we were selling the most of. And so that was a good thing with lockdown, I guess, was it gave our customers a chance to see a much more wider range of what we carry, much more of our portfolio, I guess.
That's great. That's fantastic. It's good to hear that. So you mentioned that the consumer in New Zealand is quite an educated one when it comes to whiskey. Certainly, the people coming through your door. What I guess pre-COVID is probably the best way to frame this. What are the trends that you're seeing in New Zealand right now?
Bourbon has been that way for a while. Single malt took off when I first moved here. Single malt was really starting to take off, and but now bourbon and of course gin is just crazy right now. There's probably 1,000 different gin makers in New Zealand right now. I could be wrong, but actually I'd be pretty close. There is so
Wow.
much gin in this country right now; it's unbelievable. But as far as the Scotch goes, or Scotch whiskey goes, we've got Cardrona Distillery down south, and we went for many years. 1997, the old distillery shut, and we went for many years, and finally, a couple, Ash and his wife, they finally got the cojones, so to speak, to start a distillery because that's no easy task, as you
Yep.
well know. And so we've got Cardrona, and there's another one or two distilleries that are up and coming now as well. But we finally got a nice, beautiful distillery down on the South Island called Cardrona, which is lovely. They've now got a 6-year-old out now, just behind me there. But yeah, so it's good to have them back. But as far as New Zealand being an educated group of people, I do tastings all around the world, and it's quite interesting in New Zealand. And we're lucky in that a gentleman really helped this country. There's been many, but one that stands out, Michael Fraser Milne from the South Islands, got Whiskey Galore, and he's Scottish, and he brought his knowledge over here, and he's been doing tastings for a long time here, and I've learned a lot from him. As a matter of fact, he's kind of been a mentor, so to speak. But he himself, myself up on the North Island, and then Jack from Glengarry's. There's a lot of people. Um, John down at Meenan's, they've now closed, but way down in Invercargill or Dunedin. So New Zealand's been very lucky to be a small country, but had some. I don't want to say big players. That's such a horrible way to put it, but people that are really passionate about their whiskey and that do tastings and that have different takes. Me being American, John English, Jack is actually Croatian / Kiwi. Michael Fraser being from Scotland. So a mix of all these people that are really passionate about whiskey and bourbons and such, but
Yep.
not just necessarily from Scotland and America, Ireland. We're passionate about just the spirit itself. So all of us will venture out from India to Taiwan to Japan. We all appreciate everything. So we brought it kind of together. And like I say, it's an unusual situation. New Zealand being such a small country as far as population, barely 5 million people.
Yep.
But all the whiskey knowledge here it's amazing. So when you go to a whiskey tasting in New Zealand, you've got to be on your A game. It's kind of ask Graham. He'll tell you.
Yeah.
There's whiskey nerds everywhere here, and they'll pull you up if you say something not correct in a tasting, like, actually, Sam. So yeah, it's pretty interesting.
It's funny you should say that. My friend Connell Mackenzie, who works at Adelphi now, was down in New Zealand for a while working in whiskey, and he's often said the
Yes,
same
yes.
thing. That you've got to know your stuff when you're talking to people from New Zealand about whiskey, and I think it's testament to the whiskey community that's been built down there as well, and to the work that you've done as part of that group to really build that knowledge base. Because once you've got that, it becomes a country that, like you say, it is a small population, but it does become a country that we can justify coming to visit every so often and holding some tastings of our own. So hopefully, once things go back to normal, I'll be able to jump on one of those 30 odd hour flights and make my way down to New Zealand at some point.
Yeah, you could try like 40. Yeah, it's 35 to 40 hours, but you have to fight Graham to get that spot coming down here. He likes to come down,
I
and it's
know he
always
does.
good to have him down. He's always gracious with his time when he comes down, and we understand that it's literally halfway around the world. I mean, you're at 9:30 there, and I'm at 8:30 here, so it's basically halfway around the world, different hemispheres, the whole bit.
Yeah, Crazy. Just another one quickly. I'm just seeing David Owen. To answer your question, David, no, it's natural color on the 15-year-old there, so that's going to tick that box for you. Hopefully, you'll be able to go and enjoy that one with peace of mind now, like you suggest.
You say natural color, and that's definitely something I want to touch on as far as tomatin. As far as I know, you guys, it's all natural color still, other than the blends.
No, so what we do, and we're very open about it as well. On legacy and 12-year-old, we reserve the right to add color. Now, that's not to say that it's colored every time. It's just to say that the color that you see in that bottle, that's kind of our standard. Now, 9 times out of 10, we hit that naturally, but sometimes we have to tickle that up. And I've talked about this quite a few times before on various conversations that those are products that are designed for a mass market and for mass retail,
Right.
and that consistency level has to be there. But if you want a tomatin that is non-chill filtered, is natural color, is a minimum of 46% ABV, just don't buy legacy and 12-year-old. Buy 14, 18, anything else in the range. So yeah, we like to think that we cater for everyone in that regard. So yeah.
Well, I've always appreciated, Tomatin is one of the few distilleries that they do their, basically their standard bottling is that 46%. I know that a lot of people knock it down to the 40%, especially like you say, the legacy and the 12, for the larger markets, that's understandable.
Yeah.
But it is nice. And I know I'm such a small share of that, but it's nice to see things bottled at 46%. For me, that's perfect and ideal. And if I want to add a touch of water, I can. But yeah, I appreciate that with tomatin.
Absolutely. Even on the legacy and 12-year-old, they're not at 46%, but they're at 43. It's a little bit above. And I think for me, what it does is these are products that we use to introduce people to the range. So we want them to be introduced to the idea that we're not going to be slamming it down to 40 and coloring it as much as possible. We're going to be if you come into tomatin through legacy and 12-year-old, you know that what you've got to come is going to be more naturally presented. And I'm a big fan of being able to talk about that. But those are things that are popping up in tastings quite a lot. So let's jump into tastings themselves. That was the loose term idea for the night. For you, what makes, and I'll ask two questions. Is there such a thing as the perfect whiskey tasting? And if so, what makes the perfect whiskey tasting?
Oh, I don't think there's a perfect whiskey tasting. It for me, like I never have a script. I always do my whiskey tastings based on the audience.
Yep.
Every audience is just so different. And the questions will kind of dictate, with my tastings, I encourage a lot of feedback and a lot of questions, and that really dictates the direction of the tasting. I guess not perfect, but a good tasting is when you get more involvement. People are listening and they're really curious. And for me, I like to see when people want to learn and they are curious and they ask the hard questions. And it's like especially in today's world, with everybody's got their computers literally in their hand with their phone, and they ask pretty specific questions. But the nerd level has gone up quite a lot in tastings in the last 10 years, I'd have to say.
Yeah.
But as far as a perfect tasting, I don't know. Just, as long as you're having fun and the audience is engaged and they're listening and they're learning, I guess that's about as good. Obviously you want to have good whiskeys, but
yeah,
always.
I think I would echo that sentiment there as well. If a tasting was ever to be what we would call perfect, it's got to be one of those ones where I feel like I'm having a conversation with fellow whiskey drinkers rather than me feeling like I'm standing up and presenting to folk. I think there is as much about. So I just saw a message there from Cara down at Springbank, and I went to her tasting at a festival earlier this year, one of the few festivals this year, and her message is, "Scott, I'm sure you experienced the perfect tasting earlier this year." I think that was as close as you can get there, Cara. Yeah, good shout, well played.
Of course she did. Of course she did.
Yeah. So for me, I think it is where it becomes a conversation, and you're just drinking whiskey with pals, and you can add a little bit to the conversation. I do always like it's a different situation what you and I do. You with having the store will be able to select different bottles every time, but for me, I've got the Tomatin range to taste, and we're very lucky that we've got limited editions that come through, and every store that I go to will have a different range. But you can get into the you can it can become a bit of going through the motions if you're just repeating the same thing over and over again. When you have the
Yeah, that's true.
conversation, it makes my job so much more exciting, and I feel like I deliver a better tasting when I can share that conversation with people.
Yeah, and I think I always like the challenge, and for me, and you'll get the same thing, is there's always one or two that have kind of been drugged, not not under their own fruition to this tasting, and they'll because I'll always ask when I start, I'm like, now is there anybody in here that's not a whiskey fan, so to speak? And you always get the one or two hands that come up, and they just they just can't drink it. It's too harsh for them. It just burns the whole bit. And I actually love that because I know 99% of the time you can get someone onto a whiskey. And I'll ask them, I'll say, look, do you drink wine, red wines? What do you drink? So I can kind of get an idea of what they eat, what they drink. And you can get them there. It's just a lot of people, especially the newbies, that will have tried a harsh whiskey, just the wrong whiskey. And I don't want to say names, but just one of those ones that's just blew their head off or something, and that's it. And you explain to them, look, and I'll take them through that same process. Let's say the Tomatin 14, the port cask, smell it, get an idea of what you're going to drink before you actually drink it. So you're preparing your palate. And then when they drink it, and of course you can see their face like, oh, geez, that's 46%. And I'll explain to them, look, your palate's used to 9, 10, 11% craft beer wines and such. This is true. I said, you just smacked yourself with 46% alcohol and it's going to crush you. I said, so that first initial hit is just coating your palate with that alcohol. And so once they get past that, and I'll get them to go back and like try it again, and then you can start picking through and you'll see their eyes. They're like, oh yeah, I can get some ripe cherries and some plums in there. And then by that third taste, it's over. They're like, oh, I get it now. And then you add them, have them add that little pinch of water and have them smell it again. And it just changes everything. And then they try it and they get the creaminess of it at this stage. And so when you take a newbie through like that, that to me is, I love that when someone says that no way are they drinking scotch or whiskey. And then you take them through like that. And at the end, they're the ones that's buying, the Tomatin 14 or 18 off the shelf when they leave the night. So it's kind of that's a perfect tasting like that.
Yeah, it's a funny thing because I think everyone who holds tasting looks for that spark in the eye of wow, that's changed my perception, or that's opened me
Yeah,
up
they
to
get it.
yeah. And I think what I've found myself doing is almost chasing that. And even when you go to a tasting where where you're tasting with a whiskey club and everyone loves this stuff, because I'm looking for that, I'm always looking to add something that they'll never get to try anywhere else or something like that. So I've been very lucky that I've been able to very much um, pull together the strategy for tastings and things like that. And one of the ones that I've loved doing until lockdown, and we were hoping to do so many more of them this year, was we released Decades 2. And most of the folk that are watching tonight have heard me talking about this product endlessly, but it's got whiskey in it from the last 50 years of production. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing. And what we were doing was a deconstruction of that product. So you were able to show people whiskey from 1977, 88, 95, and so on, and show them how we craft a product like this. And when you go into a room of people that are just expecting another taste of a range of a 12, 14, 15, 18, whatever it may be, and you say, we're going to try one product tonight, but we're going to try 6 whiskies. It's that eyes lighting up again. I love that sort of making a change almost.
Yeah, it's you feel like not victory, but you feel like you've succeeded. You've gotten across to someone who's now, whatever they were drinking before, whether it was good or bad or whatever, but now they get the whole whiskey thing at least. They might not carry on drinking, you never know, but at least they can understand and actually have a bit of a yarn about it. That's the thing. You just want to spark it. You want to get it in people's mind that it's not just, it kind of drives me crazy when people, they compare Scotch to gins and rums and other spirits. And I'm like, you just can't. And they'll say, well, why is it so expensive? And I'm like, well, you see these barrels right here, right? So it's aged in this barrel, the Tomatin 14. It's been in this barrel for 14 years. And you imagine if you and I are building furniture for a living, it takes us 14 years to make a piece of furniture. It's going
Yeah.
to be a bloody expensive piece of furniture, but not to mention that this wood's taken about 30 to 40 years to grow before they can actually make this barrel. So, for all intents and purposes, it's taken about 55, 60 years for that to actually make its way to the shelf.
Yeah.
Not like vodka and gin and such that you can just make it one day and serve it the next.
Yeah, I think that's the one thing that I always go back to is so there's a couple of things on that, and it's something that I really like talking about because if people look at a bottle of whiskey that's 40, 50 pounds, that's not a small amount of money for anyone to go and pick up something
Right.
that's going to be consumed. But I challenge people, why are you comfortable spending the same amount of money on a bottle of gin, but this thing that's taken 12 years to produce is considered expensive? And the second thing on that, and this is one that I get really geeky on, whiskey is probably, in terms of the number assigned to the bottle, more expensive than it's ever been. However, when you compare it to people's earnings, it's more affordable than it's ever been before. If you go back to the 1970s and 80s, whiskey was a full day's wage for a bottle of cheap blend.
Right.
Now you go into
Yeah.
a supermarket and with an hour or two's wage, buy a single malt Scotch whiskey. So more expensive, also more affordable. Again, I'm talking about more the entry level here. I'm not talking about
Yeah. Yeah.
30, 40-year-old single malts, but you get what I mean.
Yeah. And it's part of the things that we as, retail agents, we kind of have to battle as far as explaining, well, why is that bottle $100 and this one over here is 60? And it's like, well, it took one day to make that, but it took 12, 15, 18 years to make this. So
Yeah,
there's a big, big difference.
yeah,
But people get it and they're learning, they're getting there. So that's the good thing about it.
yeah, exactly. I think you can relate it to a lot of things. If you look at um, a piece of furniture that's made of MDF compared to something made of solid oak, you can make that comparison.
Right.
Um, so yeah. So another one from David, and I'm seeing Liam and David having a conversation. Liam, good to see you in. Liam works in our visitor centre down at Tomatin, so glad to have you on board. But David, to answer your question, how old is our cask strength? 9 years old. It's a non-age statement on the bottle, and that's because it does fluctuate to an extent. Sometimes we'll add a drop of 8-year-old in just to make sure we're hitting that 57.5, but the vast majority of times it's 9, 10 years old in the bottle. Beautiful stuff there as well. Now,
Yeah, you guys have one of the better cast strengths put out, non-age statement cast strengths. That's a beautiful dram. Really
yeah,
good.
yeah, it's what I call my walking whiskey. I'll always have it in a hip flask. So if you see me at a wedding or up in Monroe, uh,
Pretty bold.
yeah, yeah, you can. It's getting as much whiskey into a flask as you possibly can in that
Of
situation.
course it is. Of course it
Yeah.
is.
Again, drink
All right,
responsibly,
so
folks.
you'll add what, 2, 3 pinches of water to it, or how do you normally?
The situation. If I'm at a wedding, I'll tend to, but if I've walked up a hill or something like that and it's a bit cold at the top, I'll just have it
Just
straight from the flask as it is. I'm not going to mess about. I need something to warm me up. So yeah, beautiful, beautiful
that
stuff
will
there.
do it. That will do it.
100%. Yeah. Um, so we talked a little bit about the concept of a perfect tasting. I'm not going to ask you for some of your worst tasting experiences, but I know that doing as many tastings as you've had, there's bound to have been a couple of memorable moments of things that have stood out to you as just how am I in this situation? Something funny happening.
Ah, yeah, you get many different funny things, and you'll get this sometimes. You just get the one that knows he's got a little bit of knowledge, and
Yeah.
that little bit of knowledge is just so dangerous. And you'll the one guy that tried to tell me he'd had the single malt Johnny Walker. and you just have to kind of politely explain to them, Johnny Walker's a blended whiskey, and I try to help him out. You don't want to embarrass someone, and say that you could have had the vatting. Well, they've changed the definition, but the old Johnny Walker Green, and it's just got single malts in it. And he's like, no, no, no. I've had Johnny Walker single malt, and they'll proceed to tell you that you don't know what you're talking about. And you continue to try to. Well, it's made of a bunch of single malts. They do own a lot of single malts, but they just get combative sometimes, and they can be drunk. But I've really been lucky. Like I say, I let the tastings dictate themselves, so I can kind of control a little bit about how they go. And I've been doing it long enough that I don't let someone get too out of control. But sometimes you do get the oddball that just wants to show everybody that he knows everything about whiskey, and it can kind of disrupt the tasting, and you feel bad because people have paid good money to come to try these whiskeys and to listen and everything. And it's just sometimes you just get this jackass that just wants to do his own thing and take over. But for the most part, I've been pretty lucky.
Yeah. No,
What
I
about
would
you? What about you? Have you had that one that somebody's gone just a
always,
bit crazy?
always, yeah. I mean, I've got a funny story that I want to tell you in a minute because I was thinking about it today, and it's something that I'd totally forgotten about until I was out for a walk, and I was like, I can't believe I forgot that. So we'll jump onto that in a minute. But yeah, no, you're right. There's always someone that wants to. I don't know if it's whether they want to impress the people they're with or whether they want to sound important, and it's not a problem. They've also paid good money to have this conversation, right? So I
Yeah,
think for
yeah.
me, it's about saying, "Well, that's fascinating. Let's have a conversation about that at the end, so that everyone else can get their experience." But yeah, you do get them. I remember a couple of years ago. Well, it's a few years back now. Myself and Andy Bell from Aaron Distillery were doing a tour of Austria together. So we shared the same importer there, and he had this great idea. And I'm surprised it's not picked off in more places. But rather than me just traveling to a town and doing a tomato tasting, myself and Andy would travel together, and it wasn't so much a head to head, but we would do a split tasting, 3 or 4 tomato whiskies, 3 or 4 Aaron whiskies.
Right.
And I remember, I think we were in Innsbruck or something like this, and we had traveled around the whole of Austria by train, which is something that I would absolutely suggest to everyone. I couldn't believe how beautiful a country it is.
That's something I want to do myself, actually. Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah, it was stunning. And I think it was Innsbruck. And we're in this tasting, and I was up first this night, and I had 3 whiskies to taste through. And by the time I was done, there was this little group of, I think, 3 or 4 guys getting a little bit rowdy, and starting to just have their own conversation. And it wasn't necessarily about the whiskey, and it wasn't necessarily of any relevance to anyone in the room. And I was
Yeah.
just sitting back having a dram. And this is where I heard Andy say, just like, I think he said to them, "Is there something you'd like to share with the group?"
Yep.
I
Yep.
was like, "Oh, here we go." And the guy's like, "No, no, 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 not at all." And he's like, "Well, there's other people here that have paid money to come and listen and learn about these whiskies. I would ask you to keep your conversation to the end." And I had so much respect from doing that because I think so many people would just let that conversation go. But I
Yeah,
think
you
what he
can.
realized was these people weren't showing any interest in the whiskey, so he's not losing any customers by doing this. But then what was so funny was the guy was a little bit sheepish, and he said, "Oh, can you tell me a little bit about this whiskey that's in the glass?" And Andy turns around and he goes, "No, I've already told everyone. You should have been listening."
There you go.
Fair play to him. But the story that I wanted to share with you, I was at Limburg Whiskey Festival in Germany, and Limburg is probably one of my favorite whiskey festivals, but it doesn't make any sense. It's in April, May in Germany, one of the most boiling hot buildings you'll ever go into in your life. You're there for 16 hours over 2 days
Oh,
pouring whiskey. It's a brutal session, but it is without doubt some of the most passionate, knowledgeable whiskey people in the world. Very much like what you're saying about New Zealand. You've got to know your stuff before you go there. I was once asked at that festival how we how we account for the buildup of methanol in the faints receiver tanks at the distillery. Um, would you like some 12-year-old, sir? It's a different level of customer. So this one year, um, myself and my distributor were working there, and we booked a masterclass for our Kubokken brand. We had just released the 1989 vintage, which I think at the time would have been about 23, 24 years old. And so my distributor tells me that one of the guys that I'm working with, he'll come to the masterclass with you. I was like, oh, okay, no problem. You've got 45 minutes. I was expecting this guy to give me a hand with the bottles, help me pour some whiskies, and then just let me talk. So we get to the room, we pour the whiskies, the people start coming in, and he says, "I'll start the tasting, and you then talk about the whiskey." I was like, "Yeah, sure, okay," just expecting a little introduction. And he hands out a piece of paper to everybody in the room. Alfred Prenslow, if you ever see this, thank you for one of the most enjoyable experiences of my life at a whiskey tasting. He hands everyone a piece of paper, and what he has done is, the song "In the Jungle" from the Lion Book.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he's rewritten this song so that all the lyrics are around the Kubokken whiskey, and it's all about it's instead of a wimboe, it's Kubokken, Kubokken, and he's handing this round to 60 eh, passionate whiskey fans, and he gets them all to sing it, and it's in German as well, so I can't understand what he's saying. But for the first 5 minutes
That's
of this
hilarious.
tasting, in unison, they're all singing this, and I'm just okay. A tough act to follow. I then have to go and talk about this whiskey, and then at the end, I don't know if you ever saw these vintage Kubokken bottles, but they're black bottles. You can't see the liquid, and there's a little bit left in each bottle, and he just says something in German, and the next thing I know, the first two rows are around me on their knees with their Glencairn glass held in the air, looking for more whiskey to be poured. He told them that there's a little bit of liquid left and they've got to beg for it, and they all came running. Now, I forgot all that. Well, I never forgot about it. I was like, that was a crazy experience. But you go on, you do the next city, the next show, and then
Yep.
a few months later, I'm getting married to my wife, and this parcel shows up from Germany. And the guy that was in the tasting with me also had a screen printing business. He printed T-shirts, and he had managed to take a photo of all of these guys on their knees with me pouring bottles of whiskey, and
Oh,
he made a
like you.
T-shirt for my wife
God,
that had me with that photo, and it just says "My Hero" across it. Uh, that all happened in
that's
the space
all right.
of
That's all right.
5 minutes. It was, yeah. I think that is why I love whiskey tastings. For me, it's just the unpredictability of what's going to happen.
That's it. That's the beauty of them. Every single tasting is different. I mean, and you meet people, some good, some bad, but 99% of the time they're just great. I mean, every now and then, like I've experienced, everybody has. There's always one, but for the most part, they're just good people. I mean, if someone comes to my tasting or whatnot, and they're looking to learn, it's great. It's great. I love it. I love it. But yeah, I love. That's why I love doing whiskey tastings, and that's why I'm getting more back into it. Hence the whole world record thing.
Well, let's talk about that. You say you love whiskey tastings and you're getting back into it. You're about to try and break the world record at Eden Park. Tell me about that. Where did this idea come from?
That's what happens when you're in lockdown for 4 weeks and you're sitting around, just looking at the stars and the roof, cooking and drinking. And I actually looked into doing it years ago. At about 15, it dawned on me. I'm like, I'm doing all these tastings. I wonder what it would take to do a world record tasting. And so I flipped through the Guinness book. And at that stage, it was only about 12 or 1300. And then your man over at Brooklad, he got a group together over in Sweden in
Yeah.
17. And they did a pretty substantial one of about 2300. And so I thought, man, that's a number. It's not like you can just go into some, town hall and do 2300. So it's actually going to take a pretty big venue. And my mate Rebet Hollis, who's my new business partner with the whole Aotearoa Whiskey Club and Whiskey Venture, that whole bit, it's just a big package that we're doing. Tastings are a big part of that. And he had remembered. He goes, "Well, whatever happened with your world record thoughts?" And I'm like, well, the guys from Brook Laddie put a big number up there. I said, I'd need a big space. I said, hell, I'd need something like Eden Park, kind of halfway joking. And he's like, well, it just so happens my best mate is the CEO out of Eden Park. So we need to all have a conversation. So he set up a meeting. He's actually stuck in the States with his wife, actually. And so I went over and had a meeting with him and had a tour around and kind of told him what we were interested in doing. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, here I am having a tour with the CEO, walking around Eden Park. And I mean, this is sacred ground. That's like the All Blacks home. They just don't lose there. It's just sacred ground. And here I am walking around wanting to do a whiskey tasting on the pitch. And I just got looking at it and thinking, man, was really, really possible to do it. And Nick, he was getting carried away, and he wants to showcase his venue that's something other than a rugby pitch. It's a stadium. It can do other things. And what more cooler thing to have than a world record whiskey event? So I contacted Guinness, and they said, yeah, it's let us know, and we, put in for the paperwork and the whole bit. And we're going to have an arbitrator sent out, and he'll be there on the day to verify it. So basically, in between whiskey number 4 and 5, we would have him come up and have our number on the board of 2,500 and 12 people, or whatever the case may be. Our goal is 2,500. That's where we'll do the sales for 2,500 tickets. And then, of course, you'll have your odd man, myself, and radio, and Rebet, and whoever's there, guest on the stage and whatnot. So, and have him verify it, and then we'll go into the final whiskey and do it. But yeah, it's something that, I really do enjoy doing these tastings, and the more people, the better. And it's just fun. And just to extend that level of funness, it's like, well, why not just put a few thousand people together? And New Zealand, again, is such a small country, and we'd be quite proud. And our Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, she's a big whiskey fan, and she was a shopper at the shop. And I've actually done quite a few personal and private tastings for her. So I'm lucky enough to know her as a friend, not just our Prime Minister. So we'd have her in attendance. I'm sure she'd want to be a part of it, because she's got a bit of a whiskey background that everybody knows about. And
Excellent.
and she's all about promoting New Zealand as well, obviously. So it just, the ball just started rolling and rolling. And then we just came up with a date of February 13, and which we might have to revisit with all that's going down and us being chucked back into lockdown. And hopefully that's going to change in the next week or so, but we've still got plenty of time. And I rang Graham and said, look, would you guys want to be one of our whiskeys? Be one of the sponsors? And Graham's like, of course we will. And that's how, I got in touch with you, and you got in touch with me to do the show. And by the way, I wanted to say earlier that I am honored to be on the last publication of the live broadcast version. So thank you for that. But yeah, so that's how it kind of came about. And then we just started, filling out the forms and doing this and ticking the boxes and seeing what all we really need to pull it off. And it's not just like a 20 or 30 person whiskey tasting with a few glasses. You're talking thousands of glasses and thousands of tables and chairs. But yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. And we haven't really put it out there so much. This is probably the second or third time we've talked about it publicly, because it's still far away.
Yeah.
But tickets probably go on sale in, like, I think I was talking to someone, TVNZ, and they said that they'd probably want to get it out like in November. So we'd probably do sale tickets to the public after we did the TVNZ bit. So yeah, and I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be fun.
Incredible. All I can say is I hope you do some video recordings on the way, because the logistics of something like that are almost as incredible as the achievement itself. But yeah.
Well, funny you say that. Rebet, my business partner, Rebet Hollis, he is more on the IT and the social media and that whole end of the spectrum. And we've actually talked about doing a behind the scenes kind of thing and putting together like an hour video. And Air New Zealand have approached about some interest in actually having that package, and they can put on their flights, international flights, and you have the documentaries and things like that.
Yeah.
So that is actually something that's in the works. Funny you say that, but yeah, it's quite interesting what goes on back here in the conversations and the tour we did with Nick, and which I sent a bit of the video to Graham. I don't know if
Sorry.
he shared them with
Sorry. Yeah, I did. I did. Yeah, incredible.
you, to give you an idea of the scale of it. You know, it's yeah, it's going to be pretty fun, pretty interesting.
Yeah, I look forward to seeing how that all turns out. I think there's something quite wonderful about the fact that if all going to plan and all going well, that the world's biggest whiskey tasting will be quite possibly the furthest away from Scotland that you can get on this planet. You know, I
Exactly,
think
that's actually another part of it as well.
there's a beautiful irony in there, but there's also it also goes to show just the global nature of whiskey and the print that it's had on the world. And I think that's a wonderful, wonderful thing. And I also think we always say that the most beautiful thing about whiskey is its ability to pull people together. And what better way to come out of a year of lockdowns and quarantines by having 2,500 people come together responsibly to share a whiskey together and learn a little bit. I think that's a beautiful thing, and I look forward to Matt and being part of it and seeing how everything comes together.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. We're looking forward. The feedback's been really good so far. You know, everybody we've talked to, distilleries, because we're going to have some whiskeys from all over the world. Obviously, a world record tasting. You want to give people a chance from around the whole world to be represented. So, you know, we've spoken to Cavlan and some the guys in America. So, you know, and actually Cardrona. Obviously, we'll start the evening off with our local distillery in Cardrona, and they're
Yep.
really excited about it. And
Oh,
so, yeah, that'll be a tasting to end all, I guess. Maybe after the night, I'll drop the mic or something.
exactly. Hang up your Glencairn, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So
yeah, I'm looking forward.
So going on from that, I think that's absolutely fantastic. We're already over the hour. I'm just thoroughly enjoying the conversation. So let's go
Oh,
from the
geez.
biggest tasting to some tips for people who are looking to hold their own small scale tasting, whether that's at home or virtually. Plenty of people will be wanting to host whiskey tastings now. What tips do you give for people doing this for the first time?
Yeah, we do get asked that a lot because people want to have their little whiskey clubs. You know, there's so many little whiskey clubs, and they'll come around and I'll always emphasize the glass. You know, I've got plenty of glasses here because I do tastings, and they'll never have enough glasses. So I'm always happy to lend them our glasses. I want people to be drinking out of the proper glass because once they do, they're going to buy it anyway. So you might as well have them drinking out of the proper glass because drinking out of a tumbler, it just for single malt whiskey drinking, it just doesn't work quite as well as, you know, Glencairn glass or just any kind of tulip shape where you can capture that aroma because it's just so crucial. So that's definitely something I'll let them know to use the correct glasses. And I'll try to help them if they know their whiskeys as far as what whiskey to start with and end with. And so you can take your group through a bit of a journey. You know, you might want to start with a blended whiskey so you can introduce and talk about the blends and then go through the different styles of single malts or whiskeys from around the world, however you're going. And then finish with that nice, big, smoky, cask strength, you know, uh, Kubakan, cast strength Kubakan, you know, something like that, you know, to kind of end the evening. But that's, you know, the glasses, and I definitely you'll try to help them uh, do some food pairings because typically people are going to have some food available anyway, or you'd like to encourage it because it goes better. And that's the thing that I got into quite heavily before I moved up north, and I want to get back into that. Is I was doing a lot of whiskey dinners. Whiskey dinners were becoming quite the thing, and I've noticed since I've gotten out of Auckland that I don't see as many, and I want to get back down there and get that going again as soon as all this changes. Because I know everybody's used to wine dinners, but whiskey dinners are look. I love wine and everything, but whiskey dinners are light years ahead of wine dinners for the simple fact that people, you know, chefs, they want to, you know, if it's a whiskey dinner or wine dinner, they want to get their big, you know, spices and things that they're working on, you know, out, big flavors. And sometimes a wine can get lost in that. But with a whiskey, you've got the alcohol, you've got the strength of the whiskey and the power of the whiskey to hold up to anything a chef's going to put out. So I have really discovered whiskey dinners are absolutely amazing. Obviously, six. You don't necessarily go through 6 whiskeys in a night, but 4 whiskeys will be good. But yeah, so the glass, just the where they start and where they finish, the progression of their whiskeys to kind of put them on a path that they're going to present them in the correct way. Obviously give them information on some of the distilleries if they don't have the information on barrels and maturing. If the kind of give them an idea a little bit of so they can explain about whiskeys tasting different matured in the American oak, the bourbon barrels, as opposed to the big sherry bombs, from Spain, the sherry casks from Spain.
Yeah.
And just try to get them, because all you're doing is, getting someone else hooked on what you do, and they're just going to spread that knowledge more. And where are they going to come to get it? They're going to come back to you anyway. So it's all a big, beautiful circle as far as whiskey goes. So
Yeah.
I've always been quite helpful when people want to do their own tastings and quite encourage it, in fact.
Yeah. I like what you're saying about whiskey dinners there. The last session that we did of this was with Johnny from Whiskey and Donuts over in California, and from and Alistair, who's the head pastry chef down at Harrods, and we were talking about whiskey and food pairings and what can be done. And we got onto the subject of whiskey dinners, and I, like you, love them, but I also love drinking beer with food and drinking wine with food. And what I was wanting to try and work on, hopefully once this is all done, is a whiskey dinner where the whiskey is not necessarily paired with the dish, but the whiskey is delivered in between dishes. So the whiskey almost carries you from your starter to your main, then from your main to your dessert, and then from your dessert to your coffee. I think there's something in the journey there that would be quite cool. But yeah, I on you go.
Well, just one of the fun things that we did, I was working with a Scottish lass. She was a chef down at quite a nice place, Molly's, down there in Auckland. They've sadly closed. Well, he's relocated, I should say. And so we originally at the shop, we sold iron brew. We were some of the first people in this part of the world to sell iron brew. We'd actually bring it in from over there and we'd sell it in the shop,
Yeah,
and she knew of it. So she took some of the iron brew and she made like a sorbet from the iron brew. And we used the sorbet in between the starter and the main to cleanse the palate.
amazing.
And it was absolutely genius. It was brilliant.
Yeah, that
So it
sounds.
just kind of really all went hand in hand, So so you should try that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Scotland's second favorite drink, or for some people first, but they're wrong. But yeah, no, that's
Iron brew is one of 2 situations on the planet Earth that the local population outdrink Coca-Cola. Iron
yeah,
brew and Inca Cola in Peru. Those are the 2 situations that outdrink Coca-Cola.
it's crazy. It's crazy, and it's still the case. But it's funny. One of my favorite festivals during the year is Den Haag in the Netherlands, and there's this wonderful woman who has a small table. She sells kilts and sporrans, and I think her husband's the bagpiper that everybody moans at because he can't hold a tune, but he makes the festival come alive. Um, every year you go up to her and it's almost, I don't know if you ever saw that Dave Chappelle sketch when he's looking for, it's part of the Chappelle show. He's like, "Y'all got any more of that?" And you go up to this stand and it's, "Have you got any of that iron brew, please, missus?" And she'll give you a can and she's like, "Don't tell anybody where you got it." The poor woman just spends the whole weekend telling people, "I've got no iron brew left."
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so iron brew sorbet sounds fantastic.
Oh, it
Just
was brilliant.
in terms of holding tastings at home, I think my one tip that I would give people, and it's something that I've learned in time, I was definitely falling full of this when I started holding tastings, was not to be offended when people don't like something that you like, and also to listen to your guest rather than try and force what you like onto them, because if they're not there yet, they're not there yet, and it might take a little bit of, okay, what do you like and how can I give you a few stepping points in between to get you to what I like and get you to see that. I think it has to be a two-way conversation rather than just I'm holding the tasting, you'll drink what I enjoy.
Yeah, 100%. If you want people to enjoy, everybody's taste buds are different. I mean, you see that with wine, with beer. It just doesn't matter. Some people with beers, they're big, huge IPA fans, or They like their hazy like I do. I'm going through my hazy phase right now. So everybody, their palates are different. Male and female are different. It's night and day. And that's why I mentioned earlier in the show, I, if you can tell me what you enjoy eating and drinking, not necessarily whiskey, it'll give me an idea of your flavor profile a bit. And then it gives me the chance to at least get close to what you're looking for. And it's easier that way. You can find a path for them and help them.
Yeah.
Hope so.
One of my favorite examples of that, because there's always ways of trying to steer people in the right direction. The guys down at Milroy's in Soho, one of the questions they ask is, how do you like your coffee? What's your coffee order? Do you order a double espresso, or do you order a frothy latte? Because that's going to have an impact on, how willing are you to try strong flavor?
Right.
If you like a double espresso, you can probably handle some of those big guys from Isla. But if you're right back with a lot of milk in your coffee and some sugar, you probably need that softer approach. And I think it's a great way of approaching the mouth, approaching the taste.
Yeah, the coffee, that's pretty interesting. Actually, I have to take that one on board. You know, I've noticed recently, like in the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years, many more women between the age of 20 and 40 are drinking whiskey now. And when I say whiskey, they're going full bore. Like they'll come in looking for Lagavulin, Ardbeg. I can serve them up an Ardbeg Corey Vrecken, and they're just like, oh my God, that's amazing. And you serve that up to a 22-year-old college boy, and it blows his head off. Are you seeing? Is it an anomaly over this way, or are you seeing more of
No,
younger
no,
women drinking bigger whiskeys?
I was very fortunate during all of these sessions. One of my favorite sessions actually was when I was oh we were talking about our whiskey movement, and we were talking about women in whiskey and how it
There's a
shouldn't be.
lot.
Yeah, yeah, but how it shouldn't almost be. I think for a long time, whiskey was always portrayed as this masculine drink, and there were so many barriers to entry for women that it meant that it wasn't necessarily the done thing. So I think this idea of breaking down the barriers, there should be nothing surprising about women enjoying whiskey, because we all smell and taste and have our own experiences. So there should be nothing surprising about that. I think what is great to see is the social barriers, or some of the marketing barriers, or the advertising barriers, are being broken down. And when I was speaking to Becky, who is behind our whiskey, and she was the editor for Scotch Whisky magazine and things like that, scotchwhisky.com, sorry, to just see how far, not only how far the industry's got to go to address this, because I think when we're talking about tastings, for example, and we're talking about that person in the room occasionally that likes to pretend that they know more than us, I dare say from the conversations that I've had with Becky and some of my colleagues across the industry, that's a far more common occurrence when you're a woman working in whiskey, and that shouldn't be the case. But it is great to see more and more people, more and more women coming to festivals and things like that. And certainly up until this year, when everything got locked down, it was something that I was seeing more and more regularly. I would say back in 2013, when I first started attending shows, if there was 10% of the attendance was women, it was a surprising thing. But now 30-40% women in the audience is not a surprise anymore, so it's great.
It's unreal. Hey, I just had a little thing tick across my screen, Scott. This is my battery's running low.
No problem.
It'll take me 10 seconds. If you want to continue talking on that subject, I'll just go grab my charger to make sure I'm plugged in so I don't lose you.
Well, I think it's 10:20 here now, so I think we were
Yeah,
just
we've
wrapping
been on
up
an hour
anyway.
and 20. That's what
Yeah.
happens when you just start talking about, yeah, okay, that'll be great. She's going to plug me in so we can finish it up. But yeah, that's why I said when you started, it could go 30 minutes or an hour.
Yeah.
I can talk about whiskey. And anytime you're talking like-minded people, it just, yeah, it's a lot to talk about. I mean, we could carry on another hour quite easily, I'm sure.
I dare say so. I dare say so. But I think with that being an hour and 20, we should probably wrap up there. And yeah, certainly with it being 10 o'clock here, and I've got an early start tomorrow myself. But I guess a couple of things to say on this one is massive thank you, Sam, to you for joining us for the last session.
Absolutely.
Pleasure to have you on, and I think globally you're the furthest away from us that we've ever had on, so that's a nice thing to end this on, and I look forward to hearing about the record attempt. But I think, again, I just want to reiterate what I said at the start of the show to everyone. With this being the last live session, thank you so much for the last 5 months, for the conversations, for the chat that's been going on. I've not always been the best at keeping into the chat, and I've often got carried away in the conversation. But like I say, I hope you've enjoyed what we've been able to bring to you over the last 5 months. And we're not going away. We're just doing things a little bit differently, and you'll see me doing, like I say, live tastings of new products, and we'll do more pre-recorded stuff. But yeah, a big thank you to everyone that's been involved and being able to bring these sessions to life and effectively let me hold conversations about whiskey every week when I've not been able to do tastings. So thank you for that, and Sam, thank you so much for joining us tonight or this morning.
Thanks for having me on, Scott. I appreciate it. Tomatin's close to my heart, so I was happy to do it.
Great, thank you very much, and good evening, everyone, and good morning for New Zealand. So, cheers.
Good evening, guys. Be safe.